Apple has just finished the WWDC 24 presentation. And honestly, I have one question. Is Apple too old for this?
Okay, Phil.
I'm getting too old for this stuff.
Let's talk about this. So this year, Apple have started the annual developer presentation with Craig Federini jumping or like pretending to jump out of a plane. When Google did the same thing in 2012, at least Sergey Brin actually jumped out of a plane. I don't know where Apple is going with this new style of presentations. One thing that becomes very obvious is that Apple are kind of disconnecting from their community. If Google does their presentations live with comments and chat being enabled, Apple does everything pre-recorded, everything heavily edited, and then comments are off on all the live streams. Why? What is Apple so afraid of? The 80s vibe of the opening sequence does not add to that one bit. And while Microsoft have presented a lot of reimagined office work, Google have created new innovative AI models and presented how it integrates into the whole ecosystem, while Apple's big announcement in the first hour of the presentation was...
That's right, we're bringing Calculator to iPad.
So Apple dedicated the first hour of the presentation just for the different OSs and the new little features in each one of the iPad OS, watchOS, macOS, and so on. And then the second half of the presentation was what everybody was actually waiting for, and that is Apple Intelligence. I think that it was a way of Apple to kind of pique the curiosity because nothing there was really that interesting except for Craig Federini jumping between floors.
Next, let's talk about macOS.
For some unknown reason with no explanation whatsoever. Well, with that said, AI does slowly trickle into all the Apple consumer products. You know, if Google feels like a research company trying to do consumer products, usually failing, but in some cases like the Pixel, doing a very good job, Apple is the opposite. It's a consumer or like rather an appliance company trying to do research. One of the biggest innovations Apple have presented this year was the AI on device. And that's nothing we haven't seen before. It's exactly like the Gemini Nano that Google presented earlier this year. And it's mostly used for two things: text summarization or kind of very simple text analysis, and deciding when it's not powerful enough and outsourcing it either to Apple's LLM server or deciding to send it to OpenAI's ChatGPT, which was the other major piece of news. Actually, in the last 3 years, it feels like Apple are just following the latest trend. When the biggest trend was metaverse, well, let's build a Vision Pro. Right now is AI, well, let's introduce Apple Intelligence. Apple now has a lot of them. One of the main things that Steve Jobs did when he rejoined Apple in '97 was to introduce his quadrant of products. Basically, he decided that Apple product line needs to be very simple. He said, you basically have two types of computers and two types of consumers. You have the desktop and you have the laptop, and then you have personal use and then the professional use. That's it. When the iPhone was introduced, Steve Jobs actually proudly said that it uses the same OS X as the desktop. Well, today we have, let's count together, right? macOS, iPadOS, visionOS, tvOS, watchOS. Why? Why are there so many of those? Like, instead of unifying, they're making more and more products, and that's how we end up with the iPad Air being actually heavier than the iPad Pro. That's how we end up with 6 different OSs. I mean, it has a few smaller features, but mostly like you can mirror your Mac screen at a much higher resolution because now the calculation of what to show on your Vision Pro happens on the Mac. And also you can use those like large wide screen instead of just the kind of mirroring the music screen as it is now. If you ask me, definitely does not deserve the 2.0 number. If anything, it's like a 1.1 update, that's it. One of the biggest updates that were announced for iOS, for the next version of iOS, was that you can finally place your home screen icons anywhere. Amazing. That got an applause from the Apple audience. I mean, is that really such a big thing? You can place icons? Really? Android have introduced the material hue that changes the color of the operating system and everything around it based on the color of your wallpaper. Now iPhone has tinted icons. You can make the icons dark, or you can choose a color for the icons and change their color. Wow. Amazing, such innovation. Android 15 introduced lock in an app or like protected space. The next iPhone will have lock an app and hide an app. It really feels like just catching up to all the competitors and doing exactly what everybody else is doing, which is a shame because that's not what Apple was doing before. One thing that is kind of exciting about the new iOS version is that iPhone finally supports RCS.
RCS messaging support.
For those of you who do not know, RCS is an open standard similar to iMessage, but is supported by all the other phone companies. Huge thing, the end to the green and blue bubbles, potentially. Apple mentioned it in like a one line in the presentation because of course they do not want to get rid of iMessage. Now, when you drag a window to a specific corner, it kind of clips to that corner and you can now split the screen into like half, quarter, and so on. Something we've been doing with third-party apps for years. Now it's built into the OS, something that was built into Windows for years, into Linux for years. Now that is built into macOS. For the past, I think 2 or 3 macOS versions, there was nothing to write home about. The interesting thing about the iPadOS is that considering that Apple have just announced that the next M4 chip will be available at first on the iPad Pro, you would expect that Apple will finally turn the iPadOS, especially considering it's a separate OS. It's not the same as the macOS, it's not the same as the iPhone OS. They could convince us that this is the replacement for the Mac. This is why you should get an iPad with the M4 chip, so you can use all this software on the iPad. That's what you go with? You launch a calculator? Seriously? Well, it has a few additional features like the math notes that you can write down notes, kind of your math homework, and it will autocomplete it and solve it with your own handwriting, which I think is pretty cool. But from there to like buying the top chip, like the better chip than what is available in a Mac right now, to use a calculator. A lot of the presentation was about gaming. I feel that this kind of connects with the whole nostalgic vibe, trying to be boomers appealing to a young audience. That was the motive of the whole presentation, of highlighting how much the Mac and the iPhone are those amazing gaming devices. They're not amazing gaming devices. The reality is that on the new M chips, games with the game porting kit actually can run pretty well, and there's a way to run almost any Windows game on a Mac. Apple called the AI, but not artificial intelligence, Apple intelligence. But it's still AI. Well played, Apple. I'm not sure if I love it or hate it. Now, Apple intelligence is integrating an LLM, a large language model, and an image generation AI into the operating system. And they do that in 3 different steps, right? Step number 1, an on-device simple model that can either generate some text or summarize simple text, or offload it to the Apple servers. On the Apple servers, it can either run Apple's own language model on the server or share the information with ChatGPT. Apple's main value for the longest time was privacy. The new iPhone OS and the iPad OS uses a large language model to prioritize notifications and basically deciding if the notification is actually urgent right now or not. Should it be shown even if the user is in do not disturb mode, or reduce notifications, and all that kind of logic. And that's fully done on device, and Apple are promising us it's private. So what does Apple do with image generation? Well, allow you to make the biggest art form ever in the history of humanity, the Genmoji. You know, it reminds me of Marvin the Paranoid Android from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You know, here I am, brain of the size of the universe, and all I do is pilot this spaceship. Same thing here. You take an image generation model, cram it into a little device, and use it to generate custom emojis. Who thought that's what users want? Like, did you wake up in the middle of your night and said, oh, I wish an image generator would generate a new emoji for me? They do have a full image generator called the Image Playground, but again, it's very limited because you can add pieces of the prompt, but actually you pre-select the parts of the prompt that the image generator will use. And then you have the image wand, which is very similar to Stable Diffusion's ControlNet. Kind of you can scribble it something and then it will generate an image based on that. By the way, about Stable Diffusion 3 is about to be released, and with it I'm gonna start releasing a detailed tutorial on Stable Diffusion, so stay tuned for that. And make sure you subscribe to watch this tutorial series as well. So Apple are promising privacy. That's kind of like one of the things, and given Apple's value of privacy, let's count together how many times did Apple show the Apple logo with a lock mentioning privacy in this presentation. I'm really curious how much it actually is private, and considering that they need to offload it to Apple servers or to OpenAI servers, how can it really be private? Considering that the full LLM cannot run on the device, a lot of your data is being offloaded to the cloud. Can you trust that Apple are offloading to the cloud properly and they're not sharing with ChatGPT or DALL-E at any point? Not you, not your contacts, not the text that you are now auto-completing? I definitely do not. They introduced the private cloud compute. You know what? Apple do not know how to make software. They just do not. Apple software has been a mess always, unless it's based on existing open source software or it's based on third-party developments, not Apple's own. OS 6 based on Darwin, which is based on FreeBSD, an open source piece of software. Safari based on WebKit, which is based on KHTML. Apple's own web server software called Web Objects have been a mess and hardly have been working, and you can still see it in use today inside the iTunes Connect, which is one of the worst pieces of software I ever used. How can you trust them with building a whole private cloud infrastructure using LLMs and encryption? At the end of the day, they say, well, it's intelligence you can trust.
Unlocks intelligence you can trust.
And then it passes the data to OpenAI. It asks you that, but you don't know what exactly is being passed to OpenAI. Apple does very small incremental releases or incremental changes from one iteration to the next. Now Siri can work with that internal LLM, internal AI. It's able to perform all kinds of actions, and it can do those across apps as well with new intents. Intents, app intents. Where did I hear that before? Oh yeah.
An intent consists of an action that you want to perform and some data that you want to perform that action on.
It's been a core part of Android since version 1. And Siri now uses a lot of personal context and passes it to apps and to different models. Again, you have no, yes, they're saying it's private. You have no idea what is being passed where and when. And Siri still has an annoying robotic voice like, Apple, you have all the money in the world.
What does the weather look like for tomorrow at Muir Beach?
Forecast is calling for clear skies in the morning near Muir Woods National Monument.
Why not upgrade the text-to-speech model to something more modern, similar to what Google, Microsoft, and OpenAI are using?
Hey, ChatGPT, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for asking.
Right. In summary, I want to say the following. I know I said a lot of negative things about kind of the Apple presentation here. Full disclaimer, I'm actually a heavy user of Apple. I have I'm recording this on an M3 Max. I use an iPad on a daily basis, iPad Pro, with a pencil. I gave a lot of my money to Apple. A lot of that presentation felt kind of one of two things. One is that was basically Apple catching up to the trends in the industry. It's not that Apple wanted to go to AI, everybody went to AI and Apple couldn't afford to be left out. And second thing, a lot of the behavior that we see, like the way that the presentation is built, the way that Tim Cook basically channels his inner late Bill Gates.
Personal products that enrich people's lives.
So as the industry changes, we have to innovate and move forward.
With Craig jumping off a plane and doing skydiving, a lot of it felt as Apple saying, well, we're not too old, we're still here, we're young and hip, And when you need to show how young and hip you are, I'm sorry to say that, but you are actually very old. And honestly, what's up with Apple doing those events edited, pre-recorded, not live at all, without the demos actually being shown, which comes in stark contrast with Google's, in Google I/O, live presentation. You have a live chat, you can talk to your fans or like to other people from across the world while the presentation is happening. I mean, when Steve Jobs imagined that spaceship, he actually had a whole theater in the middle for live presentations because he was known for the events that he would run, like the presentations he would run. Let me know in the comments, what did you think about the presentation? Maybe you absolutely loved it. That's it for today. See you in the next one, whenever I feel like making a video. Bye bye.